Today I'm going to tell you a few words about the deep learning beyond what happens in vision, sound, and natural language processing. Basically, I promised to tell you more about, some insights of the hype we're living in and something which this hype might be missing. To start discussing about this hype, let's start very briefly about the historical hypes. And that starts in the very early 60s and late 50s even with Frank Rosenblatt and his model of perceptron. Perceptron was the very first prototype, if you will, of what we today can call the neural network. Perceptron was a small device, electromechanical, and on the right picture you can see the Frank Rosenblatt holding those rotary resistors, which were something that we today could call the weights of the neural network, if you will. But these weights has been adjusted completely by mechanical moves of the rotors. The perceptron was an enormous success at that moment. People were able to train it, and that was a self-learning machine, so people were able to train it to recognize tanks, which is a military vehicle, versus trucks, even if the tanks and the trucks have been completely, part hidden by the trees. And imagine yourself in the early 60s and someone tells you, this retro style and the American dream and stuff like that. And now someone tells you that there is a machine which can, by looking at the picture, recognize if there is a military vehicle there or like the civil truck. That triggers an enormous expectation and hype. Lots of money flew into the industry from both government and private programs, including venture investment. Enormous expectation has been built. Like people were telling that in 10 years, which would be 1970s, we will be living in the world of artificial intelligence. Later on, it turned out that the perceptron recognized those trucks and tanks by summing up the intensity of the pixels on the images. It turned out that all the pictures of the trucks has been made in a cloudy weather, while the tanks, all the pictures of tanks has been made in a sunny weather, which made the pixels more intense. The pictures were lightly, and the perceptron basically just summed them up together. That was very far away from what we would expect from artificial intelligence. Also, the paper and later on the book by Minsky, who made the mathematical proofs of what perceptron can and what perceptron can't, put the end to this hype. The money stopped flowing from both government and private sources. The researchers has been fired or switched to other fields. The startup has closed. The next decade after this hype collapsed is known as the first AI winter. Working in AI in that time was very unfashionable. The next rise of the AI happened in 1980s with the expert systems. The expert systems is the huge knowledge database, if you will, mostly if-then-else engine, but very complicated if-then-else engine. Later on, it has been abrogated with fuzzy logic. The whole idea was that we can expand the experts and make them like the limited supply of the expert or expert time and make them available pretty much to everybody. The idea was heavily supported by the healthcare industry in particular. They said that if we can take a doctor, for example, extract somehow his medical knowledge and qualification, put it into an expert system, and then use this expert system for diagnosis, for example, or medical decision support, then we can make the healthcare and the world a much better place. The expert system era has been and still is very much connected to the Lisp programming language and the IBM mainframes. Lisp was the typical language for writing those expert systems, while mainframes have been the gear for running it. The fate of this expert system was pretty much the same as with the perceptron. They were proven to be very complex in support and didn't meet the over expectations. And in the beginning of early 1990s, the next hype collapsed. In the 90s, the artificial intelligence was surviving what some called the second AI winter, but still it was not that severe. The people were working on AI, and in this photo you can see Daphne Koller, who is a co-founder of Coursera and the professor of artificial intelligence at Stanford. She's here in this photo, she's camping with her students at the Russian River in California, and the caption says, some might not see it from that distance, but the caption says, "Who says that there are no real-world applications for an AI paper?" And they're basically burning that AI paper for the barbecue. So the industry was still living, but somewhat undercover. The rule of thumb was to avoid, by all costs, the word artificial intelligence. They were doing something that has been called differently, pattern recognition. These words and this terminology might sound obsolete today, but that was very, very wide and very popular in 90s. Again, just to avoid that word artificial intelligence, because it turns out that in 90s, if you say that you're working on artificial intelligence, you will be perceived like a wild-eyed dreamer rather than a serious person for both academia and industry. So that was 90s. And recently, in 2012, a small and rather insignificant event triggered that hype that we are living in today, the whole world is living in today. That was the ImageNet competition and the performance of the Alexander Krzyzewski model on ImageNet. Alex Krzyzewski is and was at that time a student in Geoffrey Hinton's lab in University of Toronto. And they fought against the most established institutions of the world, including Oxford University, in the image recognition context called, well, large-scale image recognition, ImageNet, basically, which is shortly known by ImageNet competition. Those very well-established universities presented their solutions for image recognition based on the conventional machine learning, which means the extractors such as HOG, SIFT, SURF, and everything, and mostly SVM built on top of that. Meanwhile, at the same time, Krzyzewski has basically used the Linet model from late 90s, built by Jan LeCun, and extended it to work on that large-scale images. And the model outperformed the best results from the conventional machine learning by the about margin of 10%. That started this whole movement. In 1 year, no one used any more conventional machine learning for that competition. After 2012, deep learning, which is now called deep learning, has become basically a standard for lots of visual tasks and problems. That happens not only for vision. People also successfully applied that technology for other problems in, say, natural language processing, speech recognition, some of the signal processing, and the media started moving into hype. All those captions and headlines are taken basically at random from Google, all featuring the artificial intelligence as an enormous opportunity or an enormous threat. The modern hype, which we see today, even extends to the fact that now AI researchers pose for Yves Saint Laurent advertisement. And here you can see Alexander Robiquit on this huge poster, which is the outdoors advertisement, says that he is the researcher in artificial intelligence. And the image is from 2017, I suppose. This enormous hype always triggers the money flows into academia and industry. Same happens today. We use here for this data as a source this AI index from 2018 annual report. There are other reports, but the AI index, which is the most recent AI index for today, analyzes not just the annual data, which is the data for 2018 or 19 years, it also puts it on a historical scale, which gives us some retrospective on what happens today and how it is related to what happened earlier. Here you can see the growth of annual published papers by topic from 1996. And this plot is separated into all papers, overall CS papers, and the AI papers. As you can see here, the growth from, say, 2010 to 2015 was like in, well, about five or four times, let's say. But the most important is that from the beginning of 2000 to 2017, or what the last year there, we see the growth of about 8 to 9 times in the AI papers only, while all papers grew less than 3 times. That's the scale, right? So that's how people publish, and that's important for us for the rest of this presentation. Second data is about the conference attendance. You might have seen those memes, nice memes on NIPS conference, how some person says that he's going to buy the NIPS ticket for his son, who is just 2 years old today, because the conference is oversold in like 5 minutes from the opening and so forth. And this plot also shows you that this event is not so unique. We've seen this triple AI conference attendance of pretty much comparable to the modern popularity, if you will, happened also in the mid-80s, which is the expert system hype. Today, this conference AAAI is not that popular, but it has been replaced by others, such as NIPS, ICML, and CVPR. To the day, NIPS has more than 8,000 attendees. Also, which is important for us as the preposition to our discussion, is the number of papers published. That is taken again from AI Index report, and that is the papers on the archive. See, the papers are decomposed into sub-areas. The red line is AI papers over, which basically falls into AI subcategory. One paper can fall into multiple subcategories. The red line is on the scale about 1,000, which is the AI papers overall. However, if you see the blue line, that's the computer vision and pattern recognition, which gives us about, say, that's the left scale, about 5,000 papers in 2017. And also like 3,000 papers in 2016 and so forth. Basically, to understand how many papers we have overall, you need to sum them up. You need to sum up the papers for 2017 with the papers from 2016, with the papers from 2015, and so forth. And you will have about 50,000 papers on AI if you sum them up together, mostly produced by the late decade, from 2010 until basically today. You want to keep this number in mind. We have about 50,000 papers on AI in different categories, among which the computer vision and pattern recognition is the most popular, which is the vast majority of these papers, of these 50,000 papers, is computer vision. The second most popular subcategory is machine learning, which is more general subcategory. The third one goes computation and language, which we call often natural language processing or natural language understanding today, and so forth. The evolutionary computing, which is pretty much underdeveloped, and the robotics, which again is pretty much underdeveloped. So just keep it in mind, that's important. It turns out that when we think about the AI technology, the whole ecosystem looks like that. We start from the technology, some kind of technology, call it neural network. Let's think about the neural network, for example. So the neural networks fall in the very bottom of this scheme. Some people work on neural networks, which means they work on theoretical foundations of the neural networks, how they work, how they generalize, what are the some theoretical basis of their functionality and the restrictions. The next stage would be the technical application. Technical application is like image recognition or image segmentation, if you will, or text classification. That's the specific technical application of this technology, such as neural network, which later enables some industrial application. For example, if you work on image recognition, that enables you and your technology and your research and your innovation and your startup, or you name it what, to be useful in a number of industrial applications. But if you switch, say, from image recognition to, say, natural language text classification, let's do this very particular example, that enables the whole different set of industrial applications. And the interesting phenomena is that vast majority of people work on this level. Vast majority of people among the all AI researchers and industrial people work on this very particular level of technical application. The AI index, that's the same data, divides all those achievements into groups of vision and language. You might argue there are more than just two. And they also divide this, They also divide those technical applications into like object detection, object segmentation. I added object generation by myself to recognize the modern GAN hype. And they also decompose language into parsing, machine translation, question answering, and general language understanding evaluation. You might think that's incomplete. You might think, well, I don't fall into any of these. I work on something different. Yes, you might. But if you think about the people around you and the people you know, you might think about how many of them actually fall into this classification. The vast majority of the people in the industry and in the research work on some of these problems. And these are very few problems. And that's the problem. Well, why that happens? Two reasons. First starts with the beautiful visualization of Matt Might of how the research works. He says that first we start with a circle containing all human knowledge available today. When you go to the elementary school, you know a little. When you go to the high school, you know a bit more about everything. Then you go to the university, get your bachelor's degree, and you gain some kind of specialty. You know a bit of everything and a bit more about the particular topic you might be interested in, say, some kind of AI. Then you go for the master's degree that deepens your specialty, and then you read the papers or go to the PhD, which brings you to the edge of the human knowledge. Then, once you're on the boundary, you focus on a particular problem and you push. You push the boundary for a few years, and at some beautiful moment, the boundary gives away. That is your PhD, as Matt Might says. Obviously, now the world looks different for you. The world looks like that. But Professor Might reminds that the whole picture looks like that, and he advises us to keep pushing. The Ian Hoggers once said, he's an angel investor and the popular blogger on the technology, once said the world probably has about 700 people who can contribute to AI research and about 70,000 of those who can understand and apply that research. The exact numbers might be inaccurate, but the scale is sort of appropriate. And if you think about those people working on AI research, they cluster together. You work on this problem because your professor works on this problem, for example. That gives you few clusters here on the image recognition, image segmentation, maybe question answering, and so forth. The rest of the knowledge boundary remains largely unexplored. The second reason is because it's cool. See, that's the line of the people who go to the Mount Everest. The Mount Everest is the highest mountain in the world, and making a selfie on the Everest is increasingly popular these days. The truth is that you can go to the Everest without having any kind of preparation. You don't have to be a qualified mountain climber to go there, because everything is made for you. You just need to be generally fit. And that's it. You can go there. They will bring you there if you have enough money. If you have lots of money, they will even keep for you those fancy stations with the hot spa and sauna. And I'm not kidding. You actually can have your hot bath while on your way to the summit of the Everest. Those people go there just because they have the money, and that's how it works. They go there, they make a selfie, they go down. It is possible only because of the work of the Sherpas. Sherpas are natives for the Himalaya, and they do all the hard work. They bring all the supplies, they build the ladders for crossing the gaps. They supply those climbers with everything, starting from oxygen, ending up with food. And basically, that's what they do for a living. That's exactly how the people of 70 years old or a person 2 weeks after the kidney surgery get to the summit of the Everest. And that's something which happens basically to AI world today. Some people work on these problems just because that's cool. And those Sherpas are basically those who prepare the data set, the models, and the framework for us. We work on the image recognition and question answering because someone put together the data set for us, they put the model for us, they put the framework for us, they put the infrastructure for us, and all that we need to do is just push the button. By pushing the button, we can get the perfectly working image recognition model, image recognition system which works on our data, and that's still useful. In other words, you can do AI without knowing anything about AI these days if you work on these particular problems. And that also contributes to that clustering situation. However, the world is full of other problems. The boundary is large. And I want to tell you more about those problems which are largely still unexplored today and where AI is largely applicable. First is the astronomy. Exactly the dark matter problem. The dark matter problem came from the calculating and measuring the speed with which the star circles the center of the galaxy. You know from your physics classes in school, you know, if the star circles too fast, it will fly away from the galaxy. But if the circles not fast enough, it will fall to the center of the galaxy. So basically, this working and stable galaxies give us idea that there should be a specific speed with which the stars should circle around the galaxy. But if you measure that speed, it turns out they actually circle with much higher speed than they would require to stay on orbit of the galaxy. And we don't know why. We have absolutely no idea why. The physicists call that there is some kind of dark matter which enlarges the gravitational forces and still keep the galaxies together. They call it the glue of the galaxy. We don't know what that. No one knows, basically. That might also mean that the physics is somehow incomplete. Our understanding of gravity is somehow incomplete. And today we have lots of astronomical data. We have the radio telescopic data, both stationary and temporary. I mean, timely. We can get to those measures taken 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We have the visual data taken from the telescopes all around the world and on the Earth's orbit. We have the lots of like annotation data, if you will. We know what is in this sector of the sky. What are the stars if they are explored? What if they are annotated? What's their mass? What's their like type of age? Whatever. It turns out like that's a perfect problem for the machine learning, isn't it? We have tons of data which people cannot explore at all, and that answers the fundamental questions of our world. But and that's, by the way, another subproblem, or not the subproblem, but the proof of the dark matter. See, once people thought that, well, there might be some gas which exists within the galaxy and keeps the galaxy together. That there's a small picture of two galaxy clusters collided. That's the first galaxy cluster, that's the second. They went through one another, and the gravitational forces keeps the interstar gas in between. So these are pure stars. The gas remains here because of this collision and like gravitational event. But the cluster of the gravity is still there and still there. So even without gas, something holds those galaxies together. And that's the example, this image is the example of something which could be found and explored with the AI. But if you go to archive and you enter something like deep learning dark matter, you will see 16 results. Remember how many AI papers we have over there, like 50,000, and only 16 of them are on dark matter. Another problem, another whole area is the material science. Our capabilities as humans, humanity, is mostly limited by the tools and the materials we use. Do you want to have a space lift, the space vehicles, the underwater vehicles, the geological study with the deep, digging deep inside the Earth. All of this is limited by the materials we have. This is the example of the graphene. That's the new material, has been sort of recently found, like 10 years ago or something, and the founders has been awarded with the Nobel Prize. The graphene is the strongest material ever tested. The 1 square meters of the graphene would support a 4-kilogram cat, but would weigh only as one of the cat's whiskers, and I'm citing that from the Nobel announcement illustration, and would weigh less than 1 milligram. So something which could hold 4 kilogram, its weight is less than 1 milligram. That's the idea of using graphene was maybe for the space lift or the space flights or something, but the graphene is not the only one. We know today we work in AI, we work on playing computer games, but we also can play like the material science. How should we combine those atoms and molecules to produce the new materials? Well, we know something of physics and of chemistry to build these simulators for those. We can play with that simulators pretty much like we play in StarCraft and something to put together those items in a way which satisfies some requirements, like building the very lightweight or very durable materials. But if you go to archive and enter like deep learning and crystal structure, you'll find 15 papers there out of 50,000 papers published overall. And the third application is the biology. How does a genome work? Well, the genome is, let's take the cell. The cell has the chromosomes. If you start unfolding the chromosome, you will see those coils, and you start unfolding the coils, there is another coils, and you unfold them, you will see that sequence. That's the DNA, and the genome consists not only of DNA, but of additional molecules. That molecules contain all the genomic data you have. And just to play a little bit, let's see if we can understand from those simple examples what are genomes and how they work. Let's guess. These are 8 genome size, starting from 5 million letters, nucleotide, you can think of them as letters, ending up at 60-70 billion letters, and 8 different life forms, species, living organisms, on the sides. Let's try to guess which of them correspond to which genome size. So let's start from the very early, 5 million. You see here the amoeba, this is bacteria, the weed, the marblefish, tomato, E. coli, that's the small gut bacteria, Arabidopsis thaliana, that's the small plant, human, and the flower Paris japonica. 5 million. Who thinks what's the organism is it? Who thinks that's the amoeba? Anyone? Who thinks that's the E. coli? Anyone? E. coli. Next, 135 million. Who thinks that's amoeba? Okay. Who thinks that's weed? Who thinks that's the fish? Tomato? Small plant, Arabidopsis. Human. And the plant, Paris japonica. Okay. That's small plant, Arabidopsis. Next one, 950 million. Who thinks that, again, the plant, Paris japonica? Who thinks that's human? Tomato? Okay. Fish? Weed? Aha, the weed is still the favorite. And the amoeba? Okay, good. That's tomato. Next is 3 billion. Who thinks that's Paris japonica? Who thinks that's human? Who thinks that's marbled fish? Who thinks that's weed? Who thinks that's amoeba? Okay, that's human. Oh, I'm fall out of this, and something happens again. Next, 17 billion. Who thinks that's amoeba? I see you're looking where the amoeba is here, right? Second is weed. Who thinks is weed? The third one is the marbled fish. The first one is the Paris japonica. That's weed. Wheat has the genome which is 5 times longer than human genome and 3 times more complex. The next one is 130 billion. Who thinks that's amoeba? Who thinks that's fish? Who thinks that's Paris japonica? That's fish. That's living fossil which has the genome size of 130 billion. Next, 150 billion, which is 20 billion more. Who thinks that's amoeba? Ah, now I see amoeba falls in a whole different category. Who thinks that's the Paris japonica? Okay, that's Paris japonica. And as you can guess, amoeba has the largest known genome. So as you can see, biology is very intuitive, right? We start with bacteria. Bacteria has the smallest and the largest genome over here. We also have plants, which is the second largest and second smaller genome over here. We have human, who we believe is the most advanced living organism, having a genome just of 3 billion size, and that's it. So in genomes, we know quite a few about how it works. We think that genome works with gene. That's true. But apart from genes, there are non-coding DNA. So if you unfold those chromosomes, those DNA, some part of it would be genes, but the rest of that would be, we don't know what. Something which don't code any protein. And the gene is something which just codes protein. And even this picture is an oversimplification. This gene here, it is located consistently, like non-coding DNA gene, but that happens only in bacteria. In plants and in mammals and in any animals, basically, this gene will be interrupted by something which we call intron. If you think about gene as a word, like the word, say, produce, for example, it will be present in the animal DNA like this. PR ... OD ... U ... CE, for example, every gene. And to make things much more fascinating, those subparts of gene could interact with subparts of other genes to produce their own proteins. So that sounds like a perfect problem for the artificial intelligence, isn't it? We know today only about 1.5% that's the human genome and the coding genes. So we know that 1.5% of the human genome is basically the protein coding genes. The rest of them are sort of short, some kind of elements. That is the acronym for short unknown sort of elements. That's for long unknown elements. That's what else? Different miscellaneous unique sequences, miscellaneous heterochromatin, segmental duplication, symbol sequence repeats. That's like 80 happens tens of thousands of times. And LTR retrotransposons. So it seems like that's a perfect problem for the artificial intelligence. But if you go to archive, you will find about 50 out of 67, because some of them is not related to genome, about 50 papers on applying AI to genome. You might say, the biologists also publish on the bioarchive. Yes, we know that. We basically work with genome and deep trade, and we know all those papers ever published with AI application on genome. And there are about 100 papers across all the years. And they are mostly with outdated techniques, like applying SVM on top of SNP marker and so forth. So if you think about that, that's one of the most important problem of life, how the life works. And we only have 100 of papers with the most advanced technique we have today tried to solve that problem. And to conclude, I also want to reference the Wikipedia and its page of list of unsolved problems. There are a number of unsolved problems in all those areas you might think of. And you know, maybe when you were a kid, you were dreaming of being an astronaut, or clone dinosaurs from like they did in Jurassic Park movie and the book. Or, I don't know, being an inventor, like Nikola Tesla, for example. You still can, but it happened so that we all ended up in AI. That doesn't mean we should give up on that dream. We still can do that. Moreover, if you go explore, it might happen, it will very likely that there are no AI, or very limited AI application on the problem of your dream, of your interest. Basically, there are much more still unclimbed mountains and unclimbed summits in the world and the science. And today, the whole idea and the whole message of this topic is, don't go to Everest. Let's climb those mountains together. Thanks.
Thank you, Sergey. If you want to ask a question for speaker, do it now. It is in our blog. Сергей, у нас есть два вопроса уже прямо сейчас. Мы сейчас выведем на экран. Если вы можете выбрать любой, можете отвечать на все, которые вам хочется. Это первый, насколько я понимаю.
Right. That's a very good extension to that problem. See, if you go to Wikipedia on that unsolved problem, you can spend maybe a week on this stage talking about those unsolved problems. And yes, dark matter is one of them. If you want to address the dark energy, I'm sorry. And if you want to address dark energy, which is the question why the universe still expands, because according to our understanding of the universe, it should start shrinking, but it still expands. So we suppose there is something like dark energy there expanding our world, and we don't know why. Why exactly? You can go to archive right now with your cell phones and see how many applications for dark energy exist today with, say, deep learning. You might find few, maybe a dozen, but you'd be lucky so. And it's an enormously important problem for our understanding of the world no one works on in AI. Thanks.
Next question.
Well, yes, that's the exactly the message I'm trying to bring here. Our knowledge is quite limited, and there are huge gaps in the very important problems, much more important than improving 0.5% on recognizing images or generating more attractive cats, for example, or something like that. You can go explore genome with using your time and your resources and your infrastructure. Instead of doing so, you can go exploring the universe, the dark matter, the dark energy, the genome. You can try inventing the new matters with it. Try to invent your own space lift or space vehicle. That's exactly what I'm trying to say here. Let's try to build our models to close those gaps rather than cluster and work tightly, producing 50,000 of AI papers on exactly the same 5 or 6 topics. You probably need an astronomer, or you will become an astronomer yourself in some time. When we started work on Genome, we were in deep trade. The company has been founded by 2 people, an AI person, myself, and the biologist, Ruslan Rachuk. Without the biologists, we would be unable even to grab the data from the website. So the data is there, it's on the website, but we need a biologist to understand, well, what's the data, what are the labels, and so forth. So yes, you will need someone to partner with you, but that will open an exciting journey for you. You will learn a lot, and in some time, in a year or so, you will become sort of astronomer yourself. At least we became sort of biologists ourselves in 1 year of working on genomes. Oh, right, the decoding of genome structure. Well, we still don't know what exactly caused the particular trait. For example, what makes the plant, say, heat resistant or drought resistant? We obviously want to produce this plant. Well, think about, well, I don't know, an apple tree, right? And you're a breeder. You want to make the apples resistant to some particular disease. You breed them together, you bring the seed to the field, and all seeds are different, like the children of the same parents. And you now have to wait for 20 years before those seeds become the full-grown tree and will give the first fruits to test if those fruits are resistant to that disease. Then you do the second breeding and wait for another 20 years. Then you do the third time, wait for another 20 years, and now you're over. As a typical breeder in your lifetime, you can do maybe 3 breeding of the apple tree. But if you know what in genome is at least correlated with the resistance to that disease, you can take the seed, you can sequence the DNA, you can see if that seed holds this property and start growing the tree in vitro from one cell of that seed rather than doing all those field experiments. And that's just the time. Say about the drought or heat, you should bring your tomato to the field and then make them suffer from drought or the heat on the large scale, because you have tens of thousands of those seeds. That's expensive, that's long, that's what makes the agriculture the huge and quite expensive business. And we work for crop plants, so that's for crop plants. And for humanity, well, it's all which makes us unique. We don't know what makes, well, say, the vast majority of the genetical diseases came from the non-coding part of the DNA. We don't know what's there. We just know that some of the diseases came from that part that we don't know how it functions yet. Understanding how these subparts of the DNA function, how they affect our cells, our traits, would help us understand how to fix that, how to fight that, how to avoid that. That's also the key to our understanding of the life itself.
And last one question.
You don't want to work with this professor, just that, but that's not the case often. It turns out that if you try, just try, you are likely to find the professor not in computer vision, but in astrophysics, for example, who would love to take you as a PhD student, because this professor would love to try to explore those new methods on his data, on his problems. He just doesn't know how to do that himself, or she just doesn't know how to do that herself. She would love to admit you as their PhD student. And you will be, if you go to Google, you will be one of the thousands of ML engineers or AI engineers there. But if you go to that professor, you will be the AI engineer in his lab. And that makes the difference.
Many thanks for Sergey. Let's make some noise, guys.